Hi, I'm Jacqueline Lukeman with the Real News Network. Last week, the Bernieverse was abuzz with the news that Black voters bashed Bernie once again.
What do you believe is the federal government's role to fight against the rise of white nationalism and white terrorist acts? And how do you plan to lead on that in your first year as president?
We have got to make it very clear that the type of demagoguery we are seeing from the Trump administration is not what this country is about. And I will do everything that I can to help lead this country in a direction that ends all forms of discrimination.
The core of the question is about, as president, what would you do with the rise of white supremacist violence to protect our communities?
Absolutely. You know, as somebody who, I know I date myself a little bit here, but I actually was at the March on Washington with Dr. King back in 1963. And as somebody who actively supported Jesse Jackson's campaign as one of the few white elected officials to do so in '88, I have dedicated my life to the fight against racism and sexism and discrimination of all forms.
This was at She the People, at the She the People conference, the first presidential forum organized by and for women of color in Houston, Texas. As the news was spread that Black people booed Bernie again, anger toward Black voters possibly being responsible for losing Bernie the nomination have once again resurfaced online and in the corporate media. But are people really getting the full context of what happened right? And are Black voters and Black voters' issues being glossed over again? Here to talk about these issues with me today is Anoa Changa. Anoa is an attorney and a director of political advocacy for Progressive Army. She is also the host of the podcast, The Way with Anoa. Thank you for joining me today, Anoa.
Thank you for having me, Jackie.
So you attended the She the People conference, and you were very actively involved in the Sanders campaign in 2016, and that's important, I think. So tell us how you were involved in She the People and in the Sanders campaign.
Well, I'll note, because a lot of people misunderstand, my involvement was like for so many. Senator Sanders inspired an amazing effort of grassroots organizers and grassroots organizations that came together to lead the charge to really build out what we now see as this amazing juggernaut of support. Now in this cycle, I was a lead with, it was then Women for Bernie, is now Women for Justice. And I was originally, actually I started out as the Facebook administrator. We had close to all 50 states covered and Puerto Rico. And so in that capacity, I helped oversee all the Facebook admin that we had that in the very beginning we're building and driving. I think that started in around July, August, or September, somewhere like that late summer of 2015. I started doing that. I started off as a state page admin, and then as we continued to grow, there was a need for someone to kind of corral and really supervise all the other admin with Women for Bernie. And then I also served as our research team lead, which put me in leadership in the organization. So making sure that we had, really sound talking points, that we thoroughly researched Bernie's platform, found old speeches, that we could debunk, misinformation where necessary, that we could lift up and highlight his record in other areas, and that we had good explanations for hard, questions and concerns. And that, like I said, we had really good information and that we were clear, and making sure that all of our affiliates and chapters also had that information. And then as a part of that, it's actually how I started doing, more forward-facing media. Before that time, I had done some blogging on my own, but at that time, I started doing more interviews on behalf of Women for Bernie. There's a video snippet that I did just on a humbug one morning talking about why, this was a few years ago, so as a younger, approaching mid-30s single Black mother, I was supporting the senator over, a woman who was running for the same office. And that helped me really grow and hone my analysis and really think about what is important. Also, starting to talk to people and become more politically involved in terms of progressive base building. And so over the years, I've just continued at it in those conversations, really drilling down on capacity building, reflecting on the lessons that we learned, not just doing that, but also with African Americans for Bernie, curating content and really trying to facilitate conversation and dialogue and build community and driving participation for folks who were Black, like me, supporting Bernie Sanders. And that also led to Black Burner Coalition, which is another Facebook page that I help admin, which Black Burner was a term that was actually coined by my co-admin, Yamina Rowland. And we actually got some blowback at one point for using that from none other than Mr. Social Media Justice Warrior, Twitter hero himself, DeRay, who, like some Hillary Clinton supporter, blew it out of proportion and was this whole long thing. And myself and Yami were getting attacked. I think that was like by that February or March of 2016. So there was a lot there, and just still keeping in contact with people, still really learning and listening. And here we are in this post-2016 cycle, and instead of picking back up where I left off with so many folks, I really saw a different lane this time in terms of being able to just build and really continue to do the commentary. I mean, during that time, I also started doing the commentary with Benjamin Dixon and the Benjamin Dixon Show, which was at the time a 4-night-a-week YouTube show. And coming to She the People, now I've had The Way with Anoa for quite some time now as the podcast, and I had the opportunity, I built a relationship with the editor-in-chief of Rewire. So I was asked to come and cover She the People, adding my voice to the commentary and discussions and dialogue, from a Black progressive lens. And that is something that I'm working on still, commentary and analysis from that event and other conversations that I've had. I've interviewed several of, participants and people who are in attendance, and we'll have content still streaming out the rest of this month.
So you have a clear understanding and foundation of not just progressive policies, but Bernie Sanders policies in particular. Well, maybe not in particular, but definitely. So the fact that She the People was a presidential forum where other candidates presented their case to this group of specific potential voters, Black and women of other color, Native women, Latinx women. This was important. So who else was there among the other candidates, and how were those other candidates received by this very specific group of people?
And I think what people need to understand, approximately 1,700 women came together. Amy Allison, president of Democracy in Color, who brought She the People together originally. It was a convening that happened last fall in San Francisco. And then this forum happened, wanting to really put in the room a lot of the leaders, but also it wasn't just leadership of organizations. And that's actually really important to highlight and understand as well. But it was also people who were on the front lines, actual direct organizers, canvassers. You saw questions from restaurant workers and caregivers. I mean, multiple women from across the board line. Now, could there have been other people in the room who weren't there? Sure, that happens with any conversation, any town hall, any event. But I think that people need to understand the intentionality that the board of She the People, that the organizers, shout out to Jessica Bird of 3 Point Strategies and her team. Like, the reason why I took up, not only I was happy to cover it, but I specifically wrote this article first, is because people need to understand the people who are in the room, the women who put in their time, their talent, and their labor into making this event happen, and also understand the work that exists outside of the pro-Bernie world, right? Because I think the campaign knows and understands this, because you see so many people who have joined the campaign who come and are colleagues of so many people who are in that room too, right? Like, so there's an understanding of the campaign, but there is this broader grassroots space, whether it is large, YouTube commentators that are predominantly white and male, or just social media supporters who are just so intent on defending their person, which is understandable because there is a lot of misinformation or mischaracterization that happens. But the other candidates who are present, which most people, because it didn't make news, you would not have known that Amy Klobuchar was present, and she got hissed at and shouts from the audience of answer the question. You just get to the question.
Wait, she was hissed at?
I mean, there was hissing. So what folks need to understand, right, is at the outset, which I don't think was caught on the live streams. I think the live streams start at the official beginning with Amy Allison coming out. Okay. Either Amy Allison coming out or at some point right before then. But at the outset, when things are getting ready to start, Jessica Byrd takes the stage. Jessica Byrd is a really great strategist. And I think people need to be understand about words like strategist. This doesn't make someone like somebody that you get to dismiss and not listen to. They're really valuable people. I consider myself, and I am considered, a political strategist and a political analyst, right? These titles carry weight in these spaces, and we don't get to pick and choose who we get to respect, who carries those titles. Like, that's just not cool. So she came out and she just, she set the tone for the audience, and that we were to be welcoming when people came onto the stage. But this was our living room. People were coming onto the porch to come sip tea and hang with us in our space that we were allowing them into. And so, Booker and Castro, I feel, because it went in alphabetical order, right? It was a 3-hour forum. At breaks, there was a dance party, there was a DJ. You had shout out to Candace Weber, who really kept the crowd hyped in the beginning. But so I think Booker and Castro actually benefited from being first, because I think people were just trying to feel out the crowd and kind of the boundaries and the lengths they can go to. Mm-hmm. Excuse me. So you had, the two of them. Then you had Tulsi was present as well. Amy, she got a reaction from the crowd, from people in the crowd about Syria specifically. Like I said, Amy Klobuchar had some okay responses. And here's the thing: everyone was welcome to the stage with the round applause, right? Everybody was, when they left off the stage, got an applause too, right? But there were moments. I mean, we're in a call and response culture, right? And if things ain't going the right way, people are getting challenged and held accountable. This is a very different space. This is not some sterilized CNN town hall with their fake butchered questions and stuff, right? Right. This is a very particular space. And so you then had, and you saw this happening at other smaller forums in the 2016 cycle, where the audience would kind of get a little tense, because these are organizing folks. Right. But you had Senator Warren close it out, Senator Sanders, you had Beto O'Rourke, Robert, who, even though he got, you had a lot of cheering, you did see people present with his shirt on. I mean, it was Texas, he has a presence there. But at the same time, people don't know that there was a period in the audience where he got hissed at. You know what I'm saying? Really? So there were different things with everybody almost. One of the women that I interviewed for my piece, Wanda Mosley, she said that actually she had wanted to boo Castro because she was annoyed with his answer on gentrification, as if he had to give us gentrification 101. There was degrees of annoyance with everyone for varying reasons. And it was just there were these moments. So why this became something for me to talk about though, was the mischaracterization and how it got blown out of proportion, right? It was 10 seconds within the context of a 30-minute sit down. So, and that's important to note, that there's a lot of context that has been left out of this conversation. It's been framed in a lot of outlets as, basically Black people hate Bernie, and Black people at this event were just out to get Bernie. But in your commentary in Rewire, and it's the commentary is called "Here's How Bernie Sanders Missed the Mark" at She the People, you make it clear that the question he was asked was a very specific one, but that's not how that question was framed when people talk about the way he was responded to. So tell us what happened. Tell us what the question really was, and tell us what really happened with the response to that question. And I think it's really important to also understand, because one of the things that I saw that really was bothersome, and I get people's concerns with Joy-Ann Reid, right? I have my own issues with Joy-Ann Reid and the way commentary is framed. However, to completely dismiss something entirely because a different group of people may see value in someone that you don't like or have your own issues with is really a problem. I mean, there are plenty of commentators, there are plenty of people in a space that are pro-Bernie, I won't name names, who a lot of us, who are activists and organizers, who are Black women, who are femmes, who are queer, who, you know what I'm saying, are LGBTQ, like have issues, like serious, not only issues, but people who have done folks direct harm.
Right.
And yet they have very prominent roles in these spaces, right? So we got to be balanced with this stuff. If we're going to completely attack, I mean, you need to be careful when you're casting stones, right?
Sure.
So the question, and I think it's really also important to understand that Sayu asked that question in her capacity as the president and founder of New American Leaders, an organization that she founded, I think it's been 10 years now, with the purpose of making sure that new citizens, that new Americans have a role in our government, in our process. So working to get out the vote, doing GOTV work, working to mobilize and engage, voters, but also providing support. I'm looking forward to when they actually come down here to do a training, to do support for new leaders, new Americans who might want to run for office, right? And we've seen so many. I mean, one of our most, and where I just saw you, Ilhan Omar, right, is someone who is, a refugee, an immigrant, a citizen now, and representative in Congress. But like when you're talking about particular groups, and it's important to understand like the framing and where the question was coming from. It wasn't an attack or a setup. It was a question that was posed to him as someone who is a super progressive, who has these values, who we already know. We know the issues that Bernie's passionate about, right? We all know, like pretty much probably everyone knows his stump speech. We know about the 1/10 of the top 1%. We know about his commitment to all these amazing economic issues, but it's time to push beyond what we all already know and understand to be Bernie's thing and ask questions that are deeper. And what was really interesting was that her question, she grounded in, she gave that specific context about her work. She provided context before she asked this question about, we just recently saw the arrest of the sheriff deputy's son in the church bombings down in Louisiana.
Right.
So she talked about specifically the threat of white nationalist violence, its rise, and the impact on marginalized communities, particularly speaking from an immigrant perspective, but just thinking as a whole about marginalized communities and the rise and threat of white nationalist terror, and what would he do as president, as well as what did he see the federal government's role was in addressing it. Mm-hmm. And that was a specific question. Now, his first answer didn't elicit any type of negative response, although it was kind of vague and not directly answering her question. Upon further prompting, he talked, well, in that first response, I'll say, he did mention, Trump and demagoguery. But again, this is something that predates Trump, right? Like this is not simply a Trump only issue.
And to be clear, he was asked specifically about policy. He asked specifically
what he would do.
Right, exactly. What he would do in regard to federal policy to address acts. So I have to ask you the question, because this is part of the criticism that people have of people who criticized Sanders on his response. They say that, Sanders can't do anything by himself to change or stop white supremacy or racism. You didn't even let me finish. So what's your response to that? That when people say, well, these people are being irrational or immature because Sanders can't do anything to stop racism or white supremacy. What do you say to that?
I mean, quite honestly, he can't by himself do anything that he's talking about or proposing. By himself, he can't end climate change. By himself, he cannot address the economic inequities of the top 1% and the 1/10 and, the families at the bottom. And by himself, he can't do literally anything that he talks about, right? And yet, and still, we have these excuses, and excuses are tools of the weak and incompetent used as the monuments of nothingness. Now, with that being said, it is a question, and in my piece, I have a quote from Sayu. She notes that she doesn't believe any of the candidates have a good answer on this, and that's why it wasn't about attacking him. It was about getting a conversation started. I mean, Senator Sanders very boldly and correctly has been talking about re-enfranchising, incarcerated persons and their ability to vote. That is not something that he himself alone can do, and yet he's out here championing it and talking about why it's the right thing. And to be clear, Senator Sanders has had commentary previously about the rise of white nationalism and the danger, and only a few days shortly after that, we saw the shooting, the tragic incident that happened at the synagogue in California. So, and then just 6 months ago, we had the shooting, the incident at the synagogue in Pittsburgh, which my former supervisor, that was her family's synagogue, right? So we have seen an uptick. We have seen, and there is a conversation to be had. A good answer or response is not that, well, I can't do anything about it alone. Literally, none of us can do anything about any of the things that we're out here talking about. He literally alone can't do anything about Medicare for all. It takes all of us to be engaged and involved. But as a leader, someone can set the tone and set the conversation on these issues. As a leader, even though he and his campaign cannot control everyone out there who is in the DMs or the mentions or the comments or whatever, he can still set a tone from his campaign on these conversations. And just as when he was asked, I believe the first question he was asked was about gendered violence, which was a decent answer. He talked about changing culture, because how do you stop or prevent violence in the home? Like when we're talking about what he can and can't do, right? There are a lot of things that we demand people respond to. But when it comes to people of color, when it comes to Black people, when it comes to our safety and addressing whiteness and white supremacy, there is a lot more leeway given to people not actually doing anything, standing up, or having a good statement. And what he could have said in response to that question, very simply, particularly if it's something that they need to research and learn more about and understand better, because there are real considerations about saying things about having increased FBI surveillance and things of that nature because of other issues and concerns we all have as activists, right? Certainly. So it is an issue that needs to be navigated properly. But what he could have said, when he talked about ending gendered violence, he talked about changing the culture and being able to stand up and say, this is not acceptable, and naming it. That's paraphrasing, but that's basically what he said. He could have simply said the same exact thing about white nationalist violence. Because having a president, having a national leader who can very clearly and specifically name it and say this is not acceptable, that we need to stand against it, goes so much further than what we have currently and what we've had in the past. All these nice euphemisms, and in segueing and starting to talk once again about economic issues and concerns, white nationalism is on the rise, not because people aren't getting their health care. Like, let's just be clear. Like, this notion of still trying to make excuses for why we have white supremacist violence, why we have certain things happening, is not because all of a sudden we make everything equitable, which is still not going to be equitable with universal programs, because universal programs in a racist society are still going to have disproportionality within them. But that's a whole nother conversation.
Actually, I think that's a good point, though, because this is the other criticism that we receive from people who have criticism of those who are trying to hold Sanders accountable. They say that, of course he talks about economic justice because, and this is what people say, economic justice will end racism and sexism. But I think this goes to the teachable, but that's not so. And I need you to explain why that's not so, because this goes to the teachable moment that you raised in your article. Why is that not so, that economic justice will end racism and sexism?
Well, it's not so. One, because everyone who's sexist or racist isn't like economically challenged or somehow being deprived by the system of oppression, right? Like, people, when you have these isms, and really at the heart of it all is white supremacy, right? Like, white supremacy operates in a mechanism, in a way that further subjugates particular groups and lifts up others, and then uses the proximity or belief that one can get proximity to something better by holding other people down. So women not making as much as men doesn't necessarily alleviate, putting things in place for, wage equity based on women making the same as men does not in and of itself, even though people will acknowledge the statistics when they speak about disparity, having a race neutral, colorblind, gender pay increase does not address the disparity within gender for women, right? Like, that alone does not make sure that Native American women, that Black women, that Latinx women, that Asian American women are all on par with their white counterparts. And when I say Asian American women, that is such a huge grouping, right? You have some women and you have some men who are Asian American who might make more than their other counterparts, but then you have some groups like Filipinos, you have some groups who are all categorized as Asian American who are actually making significantly less, more in line with Black, Latino, and Native American, their Native American counterparts too. So just having these like when we acknowledge disparities in health care, right? Like, yes, Medicare for all is a life-saving game changer across the board for so many, but alone, having race-neutral policies does not address the issues within the system. When we look at a system, when we look at a country that was specifically founded not only on racial oppression and segregation, and I mean, it's codified, it's in the Constitution, right?
Right.
Whiteness was freedom, Blackness was property and non-human. I mean, maleness was freedom and all these other things, and womanhood was a different degree of property and not quite the same level of freedom if you were dependent upon your racial background. And so to actually dismantle and undo these things takes really targeted anti-racist, anti-patriarchal, we can't continue to look at things through a heteronormative patriarchal lens that just thinks that if we just make everything better, don't talk about these other issues, everything will be fine, because you still have people within these spaces that continue to build the same types of barriers to opportunity, equity, and justice that we say, but that we see and experience within establishment and mainstream spaces.
Those are some really incredibly great points that, I mean, that's a whole nother several shows. But the issue of economic equality, solving all of these issues, I think is encapsulated in this one example that I always have in my head. We can have economic justice across the board in this country, and that would not change the views of Robert Mercer, one of the richest white men in the world, maybe, who is also a white nationalist, who is funding far-right white nationalist political and social organizations that are on the rise in this world. So, I mean, I have to ask you as a last question, does it seem like other groups of people get to demand of candidates that they have to earn their vote, but Black people, and especially Black and other women of color, don't get that luxury? I'm going to let you have the last word on this.
Oh, absolutely. And I think one thing to note is that I am very sympathetic to folks. I do lose my patience with people because they don't listen very well, and reading comprehension is a lost art in many spaces. I am sympathetic, though, to the way in which narratives are framed, as if the senator has like this huge colossal issue. There is a problem, right? Or there are issues or challenges that do exist that still linger from the prior campaign. But I think to blow them out of proportion or to act like it is only his problem, we've just seen the rollout now with Joe Biden over the past year. I mean, not past year, God, past week.
It has seemed like a year, hasn't it?
So, which is so beyond tone deaf and gaslighting across multiple fronts, right? And to sit here and to critique and criticize, and you'll notice that I go way hard on Biden, Beto, Buttigieg, so many people. My criticism and critique at Sanders, actually, if you all pay attention, has a very different tone. And I do think that women of color in general, Black women specifically, are expected to that the people don't have to earn our vote because they know that we are solidly Democratic. And part of the concern that I have going into the cycle, not just for the Sanders campaign, but for all the campaigns, because my thing is, and I do agree with people that, he's really great on certain issues. Senator Warren is really good on other issues. There is a need to push them both further and some of them in similar ways, some of them in very different ways. But I do think that we need to make sure that we are actually building a community and relationship and supporting and lifting up the work that people are doing and recognizing who the strategic partners actually are to build a coalition that's going to win not just this nomination, but beyond in the general, right? And worrying about the DNC and all this other stuff, like pish posh. Like, Black folks, we have had the entirety of white supremacy in the federal government working against us our entire existence in this country. And we have still been able to achieve the things that we've been able to achieve. Same with people of other backgrounds and stuff, right? Like Japanese people in internment. When we look at, different movements that are various folks within Latinx spaces, have been through Chicano movement, like just tons of different things, right? So I think we really need to understand about building capacity and listening, because critique, what did we say in 2016 with Hillary? Facts were not attacked. And we're even saying it now.
That's
Facts
right.
aren't attacked. Critique is not fatal. Like, it is May. It is May 3rd, 2019. There's so much time and opportunity to get this right, to do what needs to be done, to make sure that we're investing and building in communities, because that's really what I want to see. I want to see people put the best foot forward, and I don't want to see a repeat of 2016 where you're turning around and where we have a candidate that is not investing in communities, that is not making sure that people have the resources that they need to turn out the vote. Because we have seen that when we invest, when we build with communities, when we talk to people about the issues that matter, and I know folks will say, well, Bernie does that. He does that to an extent. And with the people, when he goes into communities, when he goes into conversations with people who already have heard what he had to say before, he needs to be open and willing to have a next level of conversation, a deeper dive. Because when you're in a room like She the People, and all these candidates should have understood that if they didn't know this, then they know now. That room, you have organizers from across 28 states. You have people in that room who are the ones who are driving efforts. Like, I do work here as a consultant with New Georgia Project from time to time, and they have had, I can't remember, it's like 20-something thousand voters already registered, and it's only, that's
impressive.
April, right? Like, and they didn't start until like the end of February. So that was like only in like 2.5 months. Like, you have organizations out here doing massive text-based operations, and these are the people in that room who are bringing out Black, Latino, AAPI, Indigenous voters who are in organizations like the ones I'm talking about, are also going out and doing the work in rural communities, which is Black and white and other backgrounds, because rural is not just white, right? Like, so these are people who are doing the groundwork, who are doing the organizing, who are driving the conversations, who are having the conversations, who are doing the trainings, who need the investment and support to build. They're not just sitting here on Twitter pontificating about Marxism or whatever else it is that people feel that needs to meet their standard, right? Before they can get involved.
Right.
So we need to expand our understanding and knowledge of what it takes to win. That this doesn't mean that you have to settle on, what your core beliefs are, but listen to other people when they're speaking, because now is the time. If we're going to get a candidate that has a better racial justice, social justice lens, understanding about dismantling white supremacy, this is the time right now to make sure that we can get that person and we can push them. Bernie is somebody that we can push. It happened in 2015. It can happen now.
And there is no better way to do it than to get a candidate or several candidates in the room and critique what they have to say about the issues that people throw at them that are important to them.
And I critique Bernie because I care.
And there's that.
It's not worth critiquing them.
And there is that. And unfortunately, we have to leave it there. There's never enough time to have all of these conversations fleshed out the way we want to. But like you said, it's May of 2019. It's early still. We have a lot of race left. We have a lot to talk about coming up, and I'm sure we will talk again. Thank you, Anoa, for joining me today.
Thank you.
And thank you, everyone, for joining me. I am Jacqueline Luqman with the Real News Network in Baltimore.